This is For Advisors by Advisors. I'm your host, Evan J. Mayer, and today we have a very special guest, and Miss Alanah. Alanah Phillips. Alanah Phillips. I swear I did not do that on purpose. How are you today?
I'm good. How are you, Evan?
Good. She's the National Director of Recruiting for Lincoln Financial. By the way, anytime you're National Director of anything, it sounds really cool. Anyway, National Director of Recruiting for Lincoln. She's been doing it since 2016. It's kind of when she got in the role. It sounds like your whole career in financial services has been in that role. But she also does a bunch of other things, like hosts a really cool podcast. What's the name of your podcast?
Next Gen in 10.
It was great. Actually, one of my guests is going to be a guest on your show that you've already recorded that will be coming out shortly, I think. So can you guess who?
Spoil it, or
can you guess?
I'm trying to think about who it would be. Shane?
Yep. Shane was just here yesterday in person.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah. Very cool.
That episode is spicy. For the advisors that are listening, Shane's going to talk a little bit about breaking up with your broker dealer and that process and how it all goes. So look out for that episode for sure.
Very cool. Mine was not that spicy with him, I'll promise, but it might be fun. Might be good to hear. So talk to us a little bit about how you got in the business, what transpired you to start at Lincoln, and then what have you learned along the way? Because you've been in the same kind of role. I mean, the roles have obviously progressed, but the same kind of role for 7 years, pre-COVID, after COVID, what's changed? Tell us a little bit about your history.
Yeah, that's a short story. We'll try to keep it short. I dumbed into financial services. I was in retail management, human resources, and I really thought that was the direction I was going to go. But for anyone that's been human resources or the advisors that have to deal with staff issues and management, that'll take it out of you. It's a thankless job for sure. So now I work with financial advisors. I actually, Evan, the first few years that I was in the industry, I recruited new folks into the business and ran our training program for them. So it was
awesome.
more, helping the college age or career changers or moms returning to the workforce get licensed, helping them to navigate becoming a financial advisor and getting onto the right team. So I did that for a few years. And I still spend a lot of time on that with the American College, with the Next Gen in 10 podcasts. This morning, I did a LinkedIn training for a couple of folks in a Next Gen program that I'm connected to. So I spend a lot of time on that. And then the past 4 years has been focused on helping advisors break up with their firm and knowing those signs that it's time to maybe look out at other options. But what have I learned along the way? I think that financial services is such an important industry. We've got a lot of work to do in terms of changing the face of our industry and these challenges that we're facing with an aging population and bringing in the next generation. So I spend quite a bit of time talking to advisors about that too. How do we deal with, there's all the millennials don't want to work and they're lazy and they don't want to be a part of this industry. So overcoming some of those stereotypes is probably where I've found my passion and expertise align, Evan, and helping advisors with some of those things.
So it's interesting that we're talking about this because I talked to Shane about this yesterday. I've talked to a few advisors on the podcast so far about how to get in touch with the next gen. Now, myself, I'll be completely honest with you. Well, let me give you just a small history on my background, and then I'll be completely honest with you. I started in this business as the youngest advisor. I was 23, 24, 25 when I got started. There was no such thing as a millennial yet, or there was no talk about that. And I grew up through the business and always was the youngest. And then I started looking around the room about 3 years ago. And as my beard got more gray and my hair got more gray, I started to notice that I am no longer the youngest person in the room. And then I started to notice that I am now middle-aged in the room, which was really interesting for me to come to that realization because I'm only 42. I'm technically young in our business. The average advisor is 60.
Yeah.
But I also did not quite understand the newer generation. And what I mean that is I looked at them and I said, they'll eventually maybe need me, but today they don't need us. They don't want us. They don't need us. There's enough technology, there's stuff they can find online. And what I've learned since I started the podcast, probably more than anything since August, is that no, they do need advisors. It's just I may not be the right advisor for them in what I'm currently doing. And bringing in younger advisors that know what the younger generation's wants, needs, wishes, goals, how they see the world even, and how they see marketing and how they see relationships and what drives them is a whole different universe. And it's not that 40 and 50-year-olds and 60-year-olds can't learn it, but it is a different pedigree. And bringing in younger advisors is probably the way to go, is what I've learned. Do you agree with that?
I mean, I think we have to. We had a net negative number of advisors this year. So, I mean, I know like some of you advisors hear that and you're like, great, more clients for me. And you can buy out these books of advisors that are retiring or dying. But I think as an industry, if we want to stay relevant, if we want to continue to grow, we have to figure out how to attract and help these new folks be successful.
And how are you doing that with the Next Gen podcast? Is that what it's focused on?
Yeah, I mean, it's a couple of things, right? It's first, like, how do we tell them the truth, right? But like, I just think it's nonsense, right? There's so many of these companies, the ones that do bring in new folks, and they don't tell them if you come to, and I won't name names, but our large mutual company or our large insurance company, and you sell to all your friends and family, we're going to keep all those leads, and you can't leave with that revenue. And oh, by the way, you signed a non-solicit or non-compete with us that you didn't understand because it was just a part of your onboarding paperwork. Like trying to turn the lights up on stuff like that, which it's totally fine to start at those places, right? They're the places offering training programs or resources, but that's the first piece, right? Like, how do we tell new folks coming into the industry the truth about what's actually happening here?
And it's interesting that you say that because I'm noticing more and more that they're still able to recruit newer advisors. They're bringing them on, they're onboarding them. And within 9 to 12 months, those people are coming out and saying, hey, I don't want to do this. This is not what I signed up for. And they're leaving those firms rather quickly.
Yeah. And I think because of that, right, and we don't have information asymmetry anymore. All of those young folks that are coming out of that program, they're talking to their friends about their experience there. And then those friends are not going to apply for those companies and they have a negative perception of what we do here, right? They're posting on Glassdoor, they're posting in chats and on TikTok about they got lied to or misled, or it went differently than what they thought it was going to be because somebody didn't tell them the truth. So then we're, again, amplifying this message to the group behind them that's not going to come hang out with us.
Yeah, no, I see that. It's interesting because you work for Lincoln, which is technically an insurance company, though an investment company as well. I actually called to a friend of mine who does insurance for my clients. I basically said to him, question, is Lincoln like, because I didn't know much about Lincoln. And I was like, is it proprietary? And you see these videos from, I don't know if you've ever seen Anthony's videos with Keith Wilson.
Oh, yeah.
They do the Truthful Mutual videos. And that was one of my questions for you today is, you're director of national recruiting, but your LinkedIn doesn't look like that. It doesn't look so corporatized. Tell me about Lincoln. Tell me about your role. Tell me about what am I missing that Lincoln is?
Sure. Yeah. Somebody asked me this over the weekend. I think they were having a cocktail and there's another recruiter texting me trying to get the inside scoop. And there's a couple of pieces when I think about talking to advisors about the spectrum of opportunities in the industry, right? And this is literally, Evan, I draw out this spectrum for advisors or new folks coming into the industry, right? The captive versus ownership, right? Like the creative freedom that changes across the spectrum, the autonomy, the proprietary nature, all those pieces, right? So I always place Lincoln at an independent, it is an independent broker dealer, right? Definition of independence being you own your clients, right? You can take that information with you when you leave, pending obviously privacy laws and other pieces there, that you can control how you brand and how you market, right? That you don't have to use a website from your company and look like every other advisor. You can use a DBA. And that you don't have to use any proprietary products, right? There's no quotas, there's no push towards having to do a certain amount of something. And if those three pieces exist, then we've reached independence, right? Now, in independence, there are varying degrees of independence, right? The control that you have specifically around compliance and investments, I think, are probably the two key areas. So, somebody that is at a firm like LPL, you probably don't have to run videos through your compliance before you post them on LinkedIn, right? At Lincoln, you do, right? And I can tell you, as somebody who posts a lot of stuff, as you can see, I've only ever been told no once, and it was because I swore in an episode, actually. So will have to bleep that. But it's not a no, it's just a checkpoint at the beginning of the process to ensure that nothing bad happens on the back end, right? So I think a little more conservative in terms of compliance processes. And then, investments, I think that hybrid or RIA only option is so important to a lot of advisors right now. I'll be honest with you, I don't think a lot of them understand why, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a feeling that they have that this is sexier and better, but they're not actually doing anything different with their investments than they were in a non-hybrid RIA capacity.
I agree with you there, but you elaborate.
Yeah, so that's why I say, like, those are the two places where on the spectrum of independence, right, where there's some varying degrees of that. I do think Lincoln tends to be more conservative on compliance stuff and on the investment management side of things, but that's also why we stay out of the headlines. And E&O is not an exorbitant cost for our advisors because they're not getting dinged by FINRA or the SEC. So
advisors can apply for discretion, at your firm. Maybe can't do elaborate options stuff, but if they want to buy stocks, bonds, structured investments on a discretionary basis, that's not something that would be a no-no.
Correct. Yeah, they can apply for discretion. And I think that process, again, it's one of those ones where you have to have an investment philosophy, which many advisors do not. So if you don't have an investment philosophy, you're not going to get discretion, right? There is, I think, some friction in place to avoid this just becoming a free-for-all in some of these areas, right? So that's where I'd say we'd fall in terms of that spectrum in the industry and of independence.
Yeah, I don't think you're unusual by many independent broker dealers, in the concept that even LPL, from what I was told, their software does look at the videos that the LPL advisors post, but they allow them to post directly to LinkedIn, and then they'll end up taking it down if it doesn't fit, or email the advisor and say, hey, you need to change this, which actually, I like that philosophy better. I'm not going to lie. Where I'm affiliated, it's very similar to what your situation is. The only disclaimer is that they're not going to really reject you on much. They may ask you to put a couple sentences on the bottom that says, if you watch that Pepsi documentary on Netflix, there's no free carrier jet. I don't know if you got to see that yet or not.
It's on my list. I haven't watched it yet.
Yeah. So I don't think there's anything wrong with that. It's interesting too that you said what you said about RIAs being sexier and unique.
Yeah, we could talk about that for a while.
Well, it's funny. So I'm in Austin, Texas. For whatever reason, this keeps coming up in our talks about next gen, but because some of it was focused on next gen philosophies. But I was in my hotel room, kind of skipping one of the sessions that I thought was kind of boring, and I got a text from a friend that was on the show who said to me, "Hey, there's this so and so, and I won't repeat his name. You should interview him for the show." And I messaged him and he's like, well, I don't know if I'm going to perfectly align, so why don't you call me? And I said, interesting. I never got that kind of response. I'm like, okay. So I called him, and he works for a firm, and when I say he was unapologetic that if you don't personally own your own ADV, then you're not independent. You can call yourself independent all day long. And I said, look, I got no issue putting you on the show, but I will tell you that if you go to people that consider themselves independent and you start bashing the fact that because they don't own their own ADV, they technically are not independent, I said, you're only looking at it through one lens. Maybe, just maybe, owning their clients considers them independent, or the ability to do what they want with their employees or their office makes them independent, or the ability to brand and do all that makes them independent. Why does it have to be that way? And what we basically both agreed to on the phone is that he wasn't a good fit for the show because, in my opinion, it was just going to create a lot of negativity to people that shouldn't, because when you come from an employee channel and you go independent, that's a big enough step. You can go to the RIA down the road if you so choose, but that is a big step. Talk a little bit about what I just talked about. Do you agree?
No, not at all. Because it's like, oh, you didn't cook your own food because you didn't make the tortilla by scratch and go get the corn out from the field and slaughter the cow. Like I still made dinner last night, even though I bought the beef from the store and I didn't pre-make tortillas for myself. Like, I don't like, it's probably a silly illustration, but I don't understand why building this from scratch and having control. I think having your own ADV that you personally own indicates to me that you're a control freak, and that's okay, right? Like, that is something that I think is directly correlated. But again, my definition of independence, which I think is pretty standard across the board when we talk about it, like, you own your clients, you can take that data with you, again, pending state privacy laws, because there's messy stuff with that. You can brand how you would like, and that would include team, right? You have control of your team. You don't have these restrictions about how you can't have a junior, you can't have a marketing specific person, right? And you don't have any proprietary requirements of any sort. If those things are true, then I don't know how you could say that somebody doesn't own their business. It would be valued by a company in a way that you could sell it to someone else, right?
Yeah, you can have, well, and that's one of the things we've been talking a lot about is that there are these venture capital, private equity folks that are coming into our space able to do that. And if you are on the independent side, technically you can get involved in that stuff. And so if you can sell your business legally,
Own
and
it then?
it's
Yeah.
technically your business to sell. And look, you're right? Like maybe there are specific strategies out there that maybe don't work at Lincoln or don't work at many places, and owning your own ADV and your own RIA is maybe the only way to get certain
Yeah.
systems and things you want to do in place. That's cool, right? Like that's cool. Be independent,
Totally.
be who you want.
Yeah.
But I also don't think that employee channels are bad. There are many,
No. Yeah.
there are many friends I have that are in the bank channel right now that no matter what you tell them, they're never leaving. Like no matter what, they'll tell you they may leave one day just so that but they're not going anywhere.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And again, that spectrum I talked about, right, of different places in the industry that advisors can be financial advisors, there's a right fit for everyone, right? Based on your risk tolerance and your risk capacity and your goals. It's the same as with your clients when you're trying to figure out what they should do in terms of financial planning and investments, right? Some advisors have lower risk tolerance. They don't want to own something. They don't want to be in control of all the pieces, or they have low risk capacity, right? They have a mortgage right now and they're a single parent and they can't afford to take on the risk of being a business owner, right? There are plenty of folks that's the case. And some of them never have a goal of being independent or owning their practice. And then some do, right? And they move across that spectrum in the course of their career. And I think we obviously do see a huge shift in that the past few years of advisors moving out of those employee channels and into the RIAs and independent broker dealers.
Yeah, I think as you make it less scary, it becomes more attainable and more attractive. And it's, and sometimes I'll just piggyback on your statement of the different advisors. There's also the advisor that is just comfortable going into the office at 10 in the morning and leaving at 1 p.m. and doesn't want to own a business and doesn't want to deal with that. And you know what? Cool. As long as you're doing the right thing by your client, I think there's a right channel for everybody.
Absolutely. And I think that's part of, again, the education, the turning the lights up on what's happening. Like you said, it's less scary to make a move now. And a lot of that is because podcasts like this or information online, advisors can see that this isn't going to destroy their career in most cases. Obviously, stuff happens, but the courts in any of these cases that we've had where advisors do get sued, they're siding with advisors typically, right? They do want you to be able to maintain a livelihood. They're not siding with these bigger companies. So to that point, Evan, I think my role in educating advisors about that is showing them it's not as scary as you think, but also, like, so many people want to be business owners, right? The American dream, and we do build it from the ground up and we have all the control. And most people will not have an idea that lends itself to a business, right? And most businesses fail, and all these things that work against that. And you, as an advisor in an employee role or a captive place, you have the idea, you have the skills and experience, and you can take that skill and the clients sometimes that you've built out and the experience that you have, and you can go turn that into a business. It's a pretty low risk business idea when you look at all the business ideas that fail across our country.
Yeah, I mean, if you have the relationships, you're not going to fail. You could fail if you break the law, but as long as you stick to the law. Does Lincoln have an employee channel or no?
We don't, no, not at
No.
least on the broker dealer side. There are like folks within teams that are employee advisors, right? An associate advisor of some sort.
Yes. Yeah.
There's retirement consultants in Lincoln retirement plans that are employees, but they're only talking about that plan. They're not talking about the larger picture of financial planning and wealth management.
So I'm going to ask you a question and then I'm going to elaborate on the question. What are firms to do? Here's the elaboration. Okay. Next Gen is communicating more online than ever before. Advisors historically don't, for a multitude of reasons. One, compliance is always an issue, especially when you're working for on the employee side. You're not going to be able to advertise the same that you would on the independent side. It's going to be a lot tougher. And compliances are having issues. They're hiring companies like Hearsay and these other things that don't allow you to add audio or video or don't really allow you to go online. We were just talking about LPL and their ability to look after the fact and how I think that's groundbreaking because that's kind of important. But you know, the weekend review by SunTrust that every advisor at SunTrust puts out there where nobody in the world is looking at it, communicating with them. The advisors are not even looking at it. They're being told that you should do it because it's good for presence, but it does zero for any purpose. What are firms going to have to start doing if they really want to start taking on the next gen?
Yeah, this is a huge part of the problem, Evan, is that like we bring in these new folks and then half the time we lie to them, right? And then this is a hard business to start from scratch and go out and try to find clients and all those things. But then we're like, oh, go find clients. And then we take away all of the primary free sources that they might be able to go find clients, right? Like we've given them a bad set of tools because cold calling does not work very much anymore. Maybe if you're cold calling businesses or advisors, you guys still pick up the phone. But for new folks looking for clients, like social media, websites, virtual digital options are the way that people find new clients now, right? It's cost effective. It's easy to have your funnels go out and drive back to a website or drive back to a download this and let me drip on you with my newsletter. So it's going to have to change. I will say, like, the piece of it, though, that falls on advisors is pushing for this, right? I think there's a lot of advisors that give up really easy in these conversations with compliance and use that as an excuse. And like, don't get me wrong, it's annoying to have to get something approved ahead of time. That creates friction. It makes people not do it. But if you can figure out, and this has happened, I've seen it happen with a lot of Northwestern Mutual and Jones advisors. I had done a training in 2020 on how to prospect on LinkedIn, and I had a bunch of Northwestern Mutual and Jones folks on there, and they're like, oh, we're never going to be able to do this. Well, they went back to compliance and they said, hey, what if we post about our office furniture, our dogs, our soccer games, right? Non-financial advice related stuff. And that was where we found the leeway, right? So I do think some of it is advisors having to get a little creative and to push on compliance so that hopefully we do change that at some point for next gen.
Yeah, it's very tough. And, you know, even this podcast, which was revolutionary to get this approved, I actually had to apply as an OBA to get it approved, and which by the parameters, however to get it approved, I was willing to kind of jump through that. And you're right. At my prior firm, I remember pushing them a little bit about the ability to do videos or do something. And there wasn't enough push because the average advisor population had been there for 15 years and kind of stuck in the system. And so the ones that had the power, the advisors to come up and say, hey, we want this and we need this now, I don't think it was going to go anywhere anytime soon. That was the problem.
No, that's true. And I do spend a decent amount of time empowering the next gen folks that are on these teams, right? If you're probably paired with on many of these teams, $1 million plus producer, he or she has some weight, right? Like, how do you leverage their weight and call compliance together and have a conversation about what you can do, right? Yeah. Not, here's my list of stuff that you're going to say no to, but what can I do, right? Here's the ideas I have. How do we do this in a way that you're comfortable with from a compliance perspective? Because I think there is a lot of stuff they are comfortable with, but it's easier to say no because the lowest common denominator person can't handle generic parameters, right? They need more specific parameters.
Yeah, yeah, and then problem is the SEC and FINRA and these
Yeah.
agencies constantly changing the rules also creates a lot of money to be spent and worry on these firms that say, why do we need to do that? So
Yep.
talk a little bit about a virtual world we're in on the recruitment end. Are you like your first meetings with prospective advisors that are going to break up with their broker dealers? Are you doing a lot of that more on Zoom than you were pre-COVID?
Probably not, honestly, right? I think I mean, my territory is national, so I can't be everywhere. And I was meeting with folks, it was probably more a phone call, right, than a Zoom meeting where we would do, what I would call kind of an approach, talk, and data gather. But now it is more Zoom than phone calls because we got comfortable with seeing each other on video, which is nice, honestly, right? We do get a little more of that body language, facial expression in a Zoom versus on a phone call. But I would say that it's shifted to Zoom over a phone call, but a lot of it was happening virtually before too.
Yeah, and so your process is normally that, and then are you flying? Are you doing a lot of traveling at this point?
Yeah, this is something that was crazy pre-pandemic and then stopped completely, right? In 2021, I think we started going out again. And then last year, Evan, by the end of the year, I was on a plane like every 2 weeks. Events that had been postponed and trying to get out to some cities to connect with advisor teams or prospects that I wanted to get in front of. So it is certainly back in full force.
And one of the things I wanted to talk to about, there are a lot of independent broker dealers that in some ways created some of these super OSJs, I'll call them, and they were feeding into these super OSJs and they were getting big and elaborate. And I'm seeing firms now starting to say, wait a minute, we should not have been doing that as much. What's going on at Lincoln there? Is that something like, are there a lot of those OSJs that are out there that you're kind of the turnkey approach? It's just easier to get the advisor to go independent with one of these turnkeys, or are you normally opening up separate offices?
I would say when I look at who I work with, Evan, probably 70%, and I have the specific numbers, but it's somewhere around that, do join an existing team, whether that's an OSJ or a true like team that they're going to be partners with, right?
Yeah.
I think I tend to work with a lot of folks, bumpers and some support. So it isn't owning your own ADV and having to go get your compliance stuff set up and build everything from scratch. And so they do need that support and they see value in joining with a team. Team revenue is 14 to 17% higher than individual advisors. So they see value in partnering with teams for that reason. But the super OSJ concept, I would say, we've got probably a few that I would classify as that, but a lot of it is teams of, let's call it 3 to 10 advisors that most folks are joining.
And that seems to make the best sense for Lincoln and the concept of keeping the advisors, but also not creating these jumbo blow up situations that could occur, but also onboarding them because, going independent is a hard thing. I've done a couple videos on what I had to do. Now, I don't consider it hard once I did it, but I also know there's a mindset out there. I used to think everybody must have this mindset, but what I've learned from 3 years of being independent is that no, most actually still don't. And that's okay.
Totally. And that, again, that's why there's different places to be an advisor on that spectrum, because it's got to fit your risk tolerance, your risk capacity, and your goals. And not everybody wants to be independent advisors. I know that's upsetting for independent advisors to hear. You think everybody wants to be like you, but not all of them.
You realize it afterward that it's not everybody. I like to ask this question at the end of the podcast. Is there anything that you're listening back and you go, there was one or two topics that I wanted to make sure we hit on, or there was a statement that I think would be helpful for newer advisors or older advisors out there listening? What would that be?
I think just one of the things that I find so interesting, and still several years into working with advisors, kind of along the lines of what you were talking about, there still is a lot of fear about making a move from your current firm to another firm, right? And there's a lot of things that advisors get comfortable with. They are not willing to admit that they're afraid of changing something or losing something. And they forget, and this is why I put things in the context of a breakup, Evan, that like there's signs in a relationship, a personal relationship, that you are not well matched anymore, right? You're not serving each other. Something is misaligned in some way. And often in personal relationships, we ignore those signs too, right? And then relationships become bad. And if you recall those times where you noted the signs and you decided to break up with someone, it sucks, right? Like no breakup is fun. There's no right time for a breakup, but also you're better off on the other side, right? If you were feeling those things that made it feel like it was bad, that you will be better off on the other side in spite of that fear that, no one's going to love you or you're never going to be able to recover from this. You do always end up better. And I think that's important for advisors to remember.
I fully agree. And you do end up better. I guess you get hurt because you build relationships with people and you expect that you leaving. But then when you put things into the right perspective, that at the end of the day, you dump them. And so they're not going to love you always. It makes a lot of sense. This was phenomenal. A lot better than I thought it was going to be. Really enjoyed it. Not saying it was bad at all, but
you thought it was going to be bad?
No, when people reschedule, when I book, I always start going, do they not have the passion? You blew me away. So you were awesome. How do people get a hold of you?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn. That's probably the best way to get a hold of me. You can send a message there. They've got a cute little link thing. I don't know if you're using this in the top of your profile now, where you can put a link that like directs to your website. So I've got my Calendly in there, schedule time with me. Go check out Next Gen in 10, especially if you are a newer advisor or have newer advisors. There's lots of good stuff on there for them.
For compliance purposes, I can't do anything about my own practice on the podcast. And so I have to be careful, but you know what? I enjoy doing this more, so it's all worth it. Thanks so much for coming on. It was an absolute pleasure. Round of applause. For advisors out there, if you found this interesting, please like it. Please subscribe. If you want to get in touch with Alanah, you can get in touch with Alanah through her or through me and be happy to connect you. And again, thanks for listening.